So hello. So as I say, welcome very much to Lydia Dunford. We're very grateful to have Lydia join us again for another session on what to expect from SEND tribunal hearings. And Lydia is now, to snap, known as the Queen of the Educational Healthcare Plans. And I definitely recommend that that you have a look at some of the other things that she's written about DHCPs, which are really very comprehensive and excellent information. So I will pass you over to Lydia now, and well, how we're going to run this, I have some questions that we're going to ask. I'm going to ask Lydia, and then she's going to answer those questions. And as I say, if you have any questions yourself, please do pop them into the chat function, and we will cover those. So if I could just ask you, for those who are just joining, if you could please keep your cameras turned off, and if you could keep yourself on mute, that's brilliant. Thank you. So Lydia, hello.
Hello.
and really, here is our first question for you. Are hearings held remotely or in person, and how will I know how to access them and where to attend?
Okay, thank you for the lovely introduction as well, by the way, Sally. So at the moment, and this has been the case since, well, since the first lockdown really, back in March last year, hearings are remote. They're likely to stay remote for the foreseeable future. I think the tribunal it seems to be keen on keeping remote as much as possible. It seems to be working. People are quite positive. You don't have the kind of the costs and time for travelling to venues now, which I think is working well for a lot of parents, expert witnesses, that sort of thing.
So I think somebody has just entered. I wonder, could you please put yourself on mute? Thank you.
You can make requests for an in-person hearing, though, if you feel this is necessary for your case. The tribunal, in terms of when they will be held, how to access them if they're remote, for example, details are sent out about 2 weeks before the hearing date. So you'll know the hearing date when your appeal is registered. About 2 weeks before the hearing date itself, you'll get the details about how to either log on to the remote hearing or the venue. These then need to be shared with any witnesses that you may have as well.
Okay. And do you think moving forward, this is just a sort of a question really around the sort of COVID thing, if people are actually finding this works, do you see, you know, just as your sort of like, you know, your opinion, do you see that this could continue, that things would stay remotely?
I think it's likely, because before lockdown and when they were in-person hearings, the tribunal was having a lot of difficulty accommodating demands. So a lot of hearings would be had to be postponed or moved to different venues, and that therefore pushed things back and was extra costs for parents and timings. But I think since it's been remote, I haven't had any hearings that have been postponed because of lack of obviously a suitable venue, because there's no need for a suitable venue. So yeah, I think it's probably quite likely that this will continue in some form, whether or not it's all hearings all the time or whether it's a good majority of them. Yeah, I think it does work.
That'll be interesting to see. So our next question is, will I be questioned or challenged by the local authority?
Okay, so this is from the view of parents at a hearing. You can be questioned by the tribunal because you're there as the people who know your child or young person the best. So the tribunal may ask questions to you about them. Rarely will you be challenged like a witness would. So in a tribunal panel, there is usually, well, there'll be a judge, so someone who's legally qualified, and 1 or 2 specialist panel members. So the chair is the person who kind of, you know, chairs the day. They explain what's going to happen. They will try and put parents at ease at the beginning of the hearing, because it can seem like a very daunting process, and sometimes it can be quite an emotional day. There's a lot being discussed about a child or young person. It can be a very long day. As I said, the panel might like to hear more about the child or young person from the parents. They may ask questions for a kind of background, summary of their views. Normally this happens not as a definitive kind of rule, but this is usually at the beginning or the end of the hearing. But the panel will like to hear parents' views at some point. The panel may have specific questions for parents as well, depending on the case and what's in the paper bundle already submitted. So parents should be kind of ready beforehand to talk about their child and any difficulties in case it comes up. If you've got parents who've got a legal representative or an advocate or someone there on the day to represent you, they will then question the witnesses for both parents and the local authority. If you don't have a representative and it's you as parents there, you may have witnesses as well, the tribunal will factor this in when considering what information is still needed from the local authority that isn't already in the paper bundle, what information needs to be asked from their witnesses, potentially, or the school, whatever it may be. So the tribunal will take a kind of inquisitorial approach and ask witnesses questions on their own stead anyway, if they think actually this is appropriate. And I've had panels where sometimes they will ask lots of questions of witnesses, some they will ask one or two. It really does depend what the case is, really.
Thank you. So if my hearing is remote, how will I be able to contact my witnesses or legal representative if I have a question?
Yeah, so this is, I appreciate, one of the downsides potentially of not having an in-person hearing, because you can't have those meetings with parents, with your witnesses. You can't go for breaks during the day to discuss things, and you can't also negotiate really with the local authority. So that is something that we are adapting to, parents are adapting to, and witnesses. It's a good idea before a hearing to have a plan of, will you be in contact via email throughout the day, or like a group chat function, so WhatsApp, something similar, if that's appropriate. There will still be breaks factored into the day depending on the timing and the length of the hearing. So those are opportunities, if you need to contact your witnesses, your legal representative if you have one, so that could be phone or email. Parents can also ask for a break as well during the hearing if they do feel there's something that they need to check with their legal representative and they don't want to raise it in front of the panel, the local authority, the witnesses, because things do come up and there might be something raised in evidence. The parents might go, oh, how do we respond to this? And they might need a bit of discussion. So you do have to be a bit creative. It does work. I've done a couple of hearings during lockdown, I think sort of 3 or 4, and not had any difficulties with it being remote in terms of contact with parents, but it is something that you need to kind of plan ahead for, and factor in that you won't have those natural breaks in the day to speak, or to kind of pass little post-it notes with questions or something to each other. You can't do that. But yeah, as long as you plan ahead and have kind of in that point I'd always say have 2 separate screens with you. So have one screen where you can access your emails, anything electronic, so like the bundle itself, working document, and another screen separately just for logging into the hearing. So that means it's much easier to go rather than flicking, it just wouldn't work on one screen. I don't think so. It makes it a bit easier if you do it that way, if you can. I think a question came into the chat.
Oh, but, yeah, a couple did actually. Is it it'd be appropriate actually for me to ask you one of them anyway, Lydia? Yeah. Is that okay? Great. Yeah, thank you, Aisha. I have submitted our appeal documentations 10 days ago. So when do you think we will get a date for the court date for the court?
The tribunal takes around 10 to 14 days to register appeals. Some come back really quick, some come back within a few days, others are a bit longer. So yeah, they are, yeah, so as long as you've got you'll get a confirmation email from the tribunal when you lodged the appeal. Keep that. If it goes past 2 weeks and you're thinking actually, they haven't heard, you can always chase them up, but I think they do say don't contact us within like 20 days. We are processing it. But it also depends on what kind of appeal it is. If it's you know, is it one that you want to get kind of booked in urgently? Is it one with, you know, looking at school placement for September and you want to get an earlier hearing date as possible, then that might be something to chase. But otherwise it should come in fairly soon, I would imagine.
There is one more here, which again might be relevant, which is what kind of specialist reports do you need? What is required? And is it advisable to have a solicitor?
So the report really depends on the child or the young person and what issues are at hand, really. Most cases you're looking at an educational psychologist, because they are kind of key for talking about school placements for one thing, as well as child's academic cognitive needs, but also kind of the, you know, their mental health side, social side of things as well, potentially. But there's also speech and language therapists, there's occupational therapists, physiotherapists. You can get all sorts. You could have one who are like play therapists, music therapists, you know, hydrotherapy. There's a lot. Again, it does depend on the needs of the child, and you know, do you need updated information? Most likely, yes, parents do, because information and evidence so far to inform the EHCP is often out of date, or it isn't very clear or specified. So often it is worth looking at that. And also those do obviously come at their own costs, for the experts to assess, travel, prepare the reports, and to attend as witnesses as well on the day for the hearing as well. If you need a solicitor, we'd always say it's worth getting initial advice if you're not sure, because you don't have to, it's then, you know, it's up to you and what your situation is. We, you know, us as a firm and a team rather, we help parents in different ways. So we like to have us doing all of the appeal work for them, including representing at the hearing. Other parents are happy doing day-to-day work, and they say they come to us for specific bits of advice or specific points in the appeal for us to advise them. It really does depend. So what we would always say is get initial advice if you're not sure about what to do, because from that point you can then decide if you want legal advice going forward and how you want that, really.
Great. Lydia, there are other questions coming in, but I wonder if we just sort of move on, because I know they're going to, and we'll try and get back to them towards the end. Is that okay?
That's all right.
Yeah, we'll have time to ask those questions sort of at the end, if that's okay. But they're really interesting questions. So yeah, thank you those people who put those on. So well, we've just sort of covered this one, I think, have we? Or well, I will anyway. What information will I need for the hearing? Is there anything else?
So yeah, so you need to have the bundle with you, which at the moment is electronic, but you could print out a copy, but they can be quite a lot of pages. So, you know, if you can be green with it and not print them out, that's always good, but it depends if you prefer having a paper copy to make notes on and that sort of thing. The working document of the EHCP, if that's applicable to your case, because that will be the document that will be used as the basis of discussions. So they'll be saying what is still left to be agreed in this EHCP, what's the evidence, what points are going to have to be decided by the tribunal after the hearing has concluded, potentially. It's also worth having, from the point of view of parents at the hearing, having any points you would like to draw the tribunal's attention to specifically about your child or young person. It's also fine to have a photo of them as well to show the panel. They often quite like that because it just reminds everyone who they're talking about. And something also that's quite nice being at home for these hearings or kind of remotely is it often means the child or young person can kind of pop in and say hello if they want. And I've had that before, and it's really nice, and it's nice to kind of for the panel to see them. But again, so they do, you know, they can factor that in because of the current situation for people. But yes, other than that, I mean, any evidence would be in the appeal bundle, so any expert reports should be in that bundle anyway. There may be late evidence from either parents or the local authority, so any copies of that would need to be provided. But otherwise, everything should be in the bundle. And it's always worth with bundles checking them before the hearing, because there can be mistakes, and we find mistakes sometimes intentionally or not. So it's worth checking before the hearing to make sure everything you've put in is included. There's nothing extra from the local authority that hasn't snuck its way in that you haven't seen. Generally they're fine, but you do sometimes get the odd thing which doesn't quite add up. That's kind of it. Pen and paper, tissues, water, you know, it's, yeah, have everything you need there to be comfortable, really. And maybe snacks are always a good thing. It can go on for a bit of a while. Have a little snack just to keep yourself going. Yeah,
I was going to ask you, when you say it can go on quite a while, what sort of like time length are we talking?
So it can be, so it depends on the issues. It's either looking at a full day, so you're starting about 10, it can go on to about 5. I had one which was on to about 5:30, or it can be listed for half a day. So that's really just, you know, the morning up to kind of early afternoon. But be prepared, even if it's listed for half a day, sometimes they can go on longer. Even if you've addressed quite a few issues, or you've addressed school when that's agreed, for example, still be prepared that it could go on the whole day, as well, because things may be brought up on the day that no one was expecting. There may be different witnesses, late evidence. It really just depends. It's better to plan for the whole day. And I think this leads on to the next question actually quite handily. So I'll let you ask that, Sally.
What if I don't have childcare?
Yeah, so yeah, this is obviously something which can be tricky. The tribunal will be mindful that at the moment most parents are at home with their children because of COVID, or they may be at home for another reason, but it's worth trying to arrange childcare as much as possible anyway. Obviously things are kind of, you know, were changing at a time where schools weren't open, which made things even trickier, but now schools are back open. You know, still try to arrange childcare if you need it. If it can't be for the whole day, if that's what you need, then try it for part of the day at least, so you can still focus on what's happening. And to also let the tribunal know at the start of the hearing. They will always ask about if there's anything to make them aware. So, you know, I've had it where parents need to go and pick up children at school pickup and think that's fine, as long as you let them know, they can kind of factor that in as much as possible. They don't want to suddenly someone says, I need to go now, I can't stay any longer, because they want to try as much as possible, I think, to make sure that all the points are covered, so parents know what's happening, what's being discussed, and also to factor in that time for parents to have their say either at the beginning or at the end, you know, if necessary. Yeah, just explain to them, and let your legal representative know beforehand as well if you have one, so they can make that, you know, raise that point with the tribunal.
Super, thank you very much. So I think we have now got some, are there any more questions to read out, Janet? Super.
Thank you, Lydia. Can you also see the questions? If I read them out, you can also read them.
Well,
is that right?
they pop up, but I can't.
They do. Okay.
So,
thank you. This is from somebody asking, I am having to use a legal aid solicitor for my hearing.
Okay.
I can't afford to pay the additional fee to have them attend the hearing without financial difficulty. They have suggested I could contact the IPSEA and ask for a representative, which would be better. IPSEA, or find the money for my paralegal.
Your paralegal, is that what you said?
So they're asking whether they should go to the IPSEA or find money for my paralegal.
Okay, so I mean, it's really up to you. I mean, there are organisations out there like IPSEA who can provide advice and support for appeals. If you are thinking about getting representation from a solicitor for a hearing, then that's something to discuss with solicitors first. And how we work, for example, is we have initial conversations with people. There's no charge for that conversation. We get a bit of background, we find out what they're looking for, and then we can say, right, here's our estimated cost to represent you on the day, also factoring in preparation. So we can do things like that and give cost estimates, so then you can consider that and go, can I afford this? Do I want to go down this route? Yeah, so it's really up to you as a parent, really, to decide what you want to do. It does come at a cost to have a solicitor there for a hearing. There's no getting around that. But it's whether you think that would help you on the day, to have someone there to kind of fight your corner, because it can be a very emotional day. It can be, you know, there's a lot of sensitive information being discussed. You've most likely got a local authority who've probably not done very much in recent years and are probably saying, you know, their mainstream school is fine, you want an independent special school, or, you know, whatever it may be. Or they've got therapists who've never met the child, or they've met them once, you know, and it's kind of, it can be quite a lot to kind of take on.
A lot to take on, isn't it?
A lot. And then it is a tiring day, even though you're not traveling to a venue. Actually just being in front of a screen can be very tiring, and you're focusing all the time. So it's, you know, it's for parents to decide if they want that. But like I say, we would have that initial chat, give some initial kind of estimates, and go from there, really.
So with that estimate, they can go to IPSEA. That's the IPSEA. Is that right? Is that a place where you get funding from? I'm so sorry, I don't know what it is.
No, that's okay. So IPSEA is a charity, so you would have to talk to IPSEA directly about if there is any cost for them to advise or represent. I don't know what that would be. I know they run a lot of workshops and training for parents, but no, the cost estimate would be if they wanted us as a solicitor, for example, you know, myself or, you know, a colleague to represent them at the hearing. So we could give cost estimates for our work and say, if you wanted us, this is kind of an estimate how much we would estimate charging. Yeah, but obviously, you know, you can you know, check with other people. At IPSEA, there's also another organisation called SOSSEN, so it's like SOSEN. They're similar to IPSEA, I believe, but you'd have to contact them to see what they can do, you know, to help you.
Lydia, I hope that's helped, Gemma. Isha, when would the hearing be at the court? She was told it would take about 5 months to get to court.
When would it be?
So I guess you've put in you sort of put in your date.
Timescale.
Yeah, exactly.
Right. Oh, yeah, so timescales in theory, once an appeal's registered with the tribunal, in theory they take anywhere from 12 plus weeks. They could go up to 20 weeks. The summer, having the summer holidays as well, that kind of is sort of kind of disregarded. The tribunal don't normally have hearings during the summer. You can request them for some type, you know, for appeals potentially, but otherwise hearings run outside of August. So that kind of August timeframe is almost kind of taken out of consideration a little bit. Yeah, we're finding with deadlines at the moment, we're getting appeals registered and they're getting hearing dates for kind of late September, October time. Often with a big gap over August where not much is happening. It does depend. You can request an earlier hearing date if something comes in. You'd have to go through the process of getting availability or non-availability really from any witnesses, from school, what the local authority can do, and then that would have to go as a request to the tribunal to say, we want to change the hearing date, here is when everyone can do. But then that comes down to the tribunal's availability, and they may not have capacity for an earlier date. They are quite stretched at the moment. I think they have got quite a lot of appeals, and their appeals year on year just keep going up and up. So you can make requests for it, but you know, you'd have to kind of see what comes in really. Yeah, and then you can always request a change if you need to.
This is from RK. We have not been able to find an educational psychologist with availability before October who will do the tribunal standard reports. Do you have a list of possible sites?
No, we don't have a list that we can kind of disclose. If clients come to us, if parents come to us and want help in finding an educational psychologist or another therapist, then we can then start making contact with people who we know and have worked with before. Otherwise, there are some websites to find educational psychologists. You know, you search for them yourselves to try and find someone. I'll remind myself of the link and I will send them over to Sally so she can share it with anyone who needs it. But there are ways to look for them. Yeah, so some experts are booked up. Just they do get booked up quickly, and I think a lot had a backlog because of COVID, and a lot of things got postponed, and then they're catching up on things. So we have found that with some too, that some just aren't taking new referrals into the autumn, but some are. So you just have to do a bit of research and you potentially may look at someone who's a bit further away than you.
Yeah.
So it's a bit more travel, but they may have availability sooner. Yeah, but I will send the information to Sally so she can share that.
We'll be creating a fact sheet
Yeah.
after the event, so we'll add all of these links in, and we'll do a bit more sort of research as well on some of the things that are coming up, just to try and point people in the right direction. So that's another useful question. Thank you.
Next is, what happens if I can't obtain reports in time? Can the hearing be delayed?
Yes. Well, so if you have your evidence deadline and you're not going to be able to make it for whatever reason, you need to let the tribunal and local authority know as soon as possible and put a request for change and say why it's going to be delayed, when is it going to be available, why is it important for the appeal, why is it necessary, and then it kind of goes through the motions, and then is either submitting it at a later date, or potentially, as I think I've said earlier, you sometimes have it where you have late evidence at the day of the hearing, a couple of days before the hearing, for whatever reason, and that gets put forward then, and then the tribunal will decide, should we allow this? Is it gonna help us make a decision here? Yeah, so it's try and get the deadlines as much as you can, but sometimes they're just not possible. So you can ask for them to be pushed back. The local authority would have to say if they agree or not. Hearing dates can be changed if potentially one or both parties just aren't ready to go to a hearing, if there's still lots of information still needed, whatever it might be. So in theory, the tribunal case manages in a couple of weeks up to the hearing and decides, is there anything still left? Can we go to the hearing? Does it need to be pushed back? But it's something that parents and local authorities or legal representatives should be doing throughout, just checking, do we have everything? Do we need to ask for a bit more time? Very worst case, you could ask for a change of hearing date, but then you'd have to go through the same process about asking for an earlier date of saying, well, when's everyone's availability? Is this going to be detrimental to the child if we push the date back longer? Is it, do we need a decision sooner? It's those sorts of things to think about, really.
Great. Lydia, there's a couple of they're quite complex questions, and thank you guys, these are amazing questions. So I wonder if we have details of how people can directly contact with you, because I think if I'm reading them out, it's too complex for you to listen and to reply sort of efficiently enough. Is that okay, guys? If I then can, ask them to direct their questions to you, and then you can really sort of give them a thoughtful answer.
No problem.
Great, because we do have another one actually here. My child has an EHCP and is in a specialist unit attached to a mainstream school where he has been since nursery. So he's due to transition to secondary school in September next year. Do we need to get an EdPsych assessment prior to secondary, so before he goes into the secondary school?
Yeah, I would say more often than not that's a good idea, depending on what types of secondary schools you're thinking about, and if there's something that looks suitable, or if you're struggling to find something, that's particularly a good time to get an educational psychologist if you're trying to pinpoint the type of school to start off with, if you don't know, or if it's looking like there's going to be one or two schools potentially put forward, so one by you, one by local authority. Might be something for an educational psychologist to go and look at those schools specifically if they're known. Yeah, it's worth considering, definitely, and looking into doing, because often that change from primary to secondary, if it's not a through school, it can be quite a jump potentially, and especially if you're in a mainstream at the moment, chances are local authority may say, well, mainstream for secondary, but you as parents may think, oh no, we want something specialist because mainstream secondary just won't work, it'll be too noisy, too big, whatever it is. So that's somewhere an educational psychologist could come in and help, in theory. Yeah,
and it gives them time. This is for September 2022. Yeah. So
it's worth planning, because you're in theory will need to have the transition view of the plan, will need to have happened and a decision made by February next year. So if you can plan for that and work backwards and say, right, let's get an educational psychologist, let's build up a case for the school or the type of school that we're looking at, then that helps in theory when you get to your review and local authorities deciding what secondary to name, got evidence there. And then if worst case, if it has to go to an appeal, you then got lots of evidence potentially to rely on.
It's a process, isn't it?
That sounds like very good advice, especially with all of the delays and everything. So yeah, it seems like a long way ahead, but that time soon goes. And if people are really sort of tied up for so many months ahead, then yeah, that sounds like good advice.
Can I give just one more, which I'm able to read out to you, Lydia, if that's okay? My son has been out of school since March 2020, and he will be 18 in September of this year. He is now keen to go back to education. However, without the EHCP, it will not be possible for him as he has ASD and high anxiety. Would this be enough to ask for an earlier court date?
Okay, so I presume this is one where there's an appeal already lodged. I don't.
Yes. Yep. Yes. Thank you.
Yeah. Well, it depends on when the hearing date is, and so, and is it, you know, if it's the plan is still there, but you're just challenging the contents? No. So
doesn't know yet. Yeah.
No. Okay. That's one where probably I would need to know a bit more. Or there is no plan.
There is no plan.
Are you appealing to get the assessment or to get a plan? I'm asking the screen, waiting for
no pressure, Aisha.
The assessment. Oh, so this is a decision.
They had an assessment.
The plan or not? Is that right?
Yeah. So they've had an assessment, but no plan issued.
Okay. Oh, I see. Right. Yes. So that the decision about whether to issue a plan won't address placement in the plan. It's just looking at whether your young person needs provision within a plan, and then the next stage is then looking at the type of placement, the placement to be named. So potentially that's this appeal, then another appeal. Again, it depends on what the current hearing date is. Yeah, that's probably something worth, you know, happy to pass on my email to have kind of a conversation or phone conversation, because it's, yeah, I appreciate there's. Yes,
please. Yeah. There's some really complex questions that really need to have very thoughtful answers.
Yeah, no, yeah, pass my details and I can have a proper chat. That's no problem.
Okay, I think, as I'd said before, please, you know, we will put Lydia's information up there so you can directly contact her with your questions. But as far as I can see, there isn't any left.
Super. Okay. So I seem to have lost control of the slides. Could you just move it on to one? That's it. Thank you. So Lydia, thank you so much for that. That was just so informative, and I think I suppose, I mean, I knew that it would be a complicated process, but I hadn't quite realized just quite sort of how much was sort of involved. And you know, from what you were saying, the kind of preparation and getting that information sort of, you know, prior to it, and thinking through what the day might actually, you know, actually bring, even down to kind of having some snacks and having some drinks that, you know, sort of to the ready. I think just those sorts, all of that information can be so helpful to kind of to remove the fear from it, but also to help in that kind of preparation. And you know, as usual, parents with children with disabilities or additional needs are asked to do an awful lot, and we're always mindful of that, you know, there's a lot to do anyway, and you know, all of these things, but this kind of information is so helpful. So yeah, thank you so much. That was very, very useful. And this will be recorded, so if you want to go back and you know, revisit it and look on our website, it will be up on our website. And we will also create a fact sheet, and we have some basic details, but we'll add to those in light of what was sort of raised on this webinar, so that we'll put all of the links there, so that hopefully then you can have a comprehensive kind of fact sheet that you can then go to. So yes, thank you very much, Lydia. And Janet, thank you for asking all of those questions. Sometimes you only get to ask one or two, but there was a nice lot there today, so that was really great. And thank you everybody for joining us sort of you know, to watch this webinar, and I hope it was as interesting as I found it.